And welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am back here with Eric Shine, and we are actually going to start our own show together. So he is co-hosting with me today, and we have a super exciting guest, Alex Newman, who is a journalist, and he's coming on in about 10 minutes. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing pretty good. As we speak, I'm going to ping Alex, because I did not do that before we started.
All right, let's do that.
Yeah, no, and let's keep talking.
That would be bad. Our guest of honor not showing up. That would.
But that's what I'm doing. But let's talk. Yeah, we're doing the intro basically for this show today, for the lead into bringing Alex Newman on the program. And Alex just was on the Mike Adams show. And if the audience doesn't know, you really like Mike Adams.
I do. I'm a huge fan.
He's a patriot, and I'll leave it at that. But
huge fan. Yeah.
And Mike is, he's been fighting. What's the name of his show? The
Yes. What is?
Yeah, I know.
I just drew a blank, and because I just listened this morning, and it's a video that's going around. Christine, is it Conquest or?
No. I'm not sure what the one where he appeared on Mike Adams, Alex Newman. There's a really good video out with Alex Newman on Mike Adams' show.
Yeah.
Something warrior, health warrior. It's not health warrior.
He's the health ranger.
Health ranger.
Yeah, he's
I think that's
the health ranger report. He does this daily situation updates. So I'm really excited about bringing Alex Newman on, and especially with Eric and I together, because I think he's going to be a great conduit to explain and tie in some of these greater concepts together and to give context to them. So I have a lot of strong understanding in the philosophy, my background, philosophy, psychology, and I have done a lot of research, and I have a wealth of knowledge and understanding of kind of cultural Marxist philosophy and how that's
not promoting it, but
no, not at all. But how that's
clear.
Yeah, we'll be very clear on that. I do not support it,
but with that said,
my understanding,
Sun Tzu, you have to know your enemy.
Exactly. And my understanding, it comes from how it's infiltrated through the 5 pillars of our current society. And Eric has a much stronger understanding of, the globalist or royalist forces that have really dominated for the past 100 years. And I think more than that, but
1300 if you go to Philip Bobbitt.
Well, if we're going back to the Habsburg, sure, 1300 years. Yes. So, but who's counting, right? But I think Alex is going to be a really great person to kind of tie some of these together and make some of those connections, see how the royalists and along with the global elites and the communist leaders, have used these tools and tactics and used China, which everybody's very, is at the forefront of most people's minds today in this country. And to understand how
when he talked to Mike Adams in the interview, he did bring up about how, and I believe it was Alex, how it was the royalists from Europe who worked with the royal families, the dynastic families in China to come up with and use communism in China.
Absolutely. So what I'd love for people to get an understanding of is how they're using these tools, one of being the CCP and communist Marxist ideology, in order to achieve totalitarian regimes.
Or even extreme capitalism, which is corporatism,
Sure.
which, goes to Mussolini and more, where they have these private public partnerships, which is fascism.
Absolutely. And
Which,
I do want to just make the distinction for the audience that, not capitalism in the sense where a lot of Americans think of capitalism as
mom
being,
and pop.
Or free market. That's typically what we think of as capitalism. But this is capitalism in the extreme sense as Karl Marx described it, because he actually coined the term. So, yeah.
Scary stuff, man.
Yeah, definitely. But as we keep saying, knowledge is power. So I think we're at a time where it's really incumbent upon the American citizens to really to have the intellectual curiosity, and to understand what powers we do have, and to take back exercise our freedoms.
The Constitution and Bill of Rights is that power, because it's such, you're seeing even now with the Electoral College, that issue is a lot more complex than the 3/5 majority that they try to point to and say that, oh, well, that made Black people 3/5 of a human being. And that's not even close to what went on in all of that.
Not even close. And I think that is something that is really misconstrued.
Yes. And and we've talked about prior to the show, and even after Alex came to the forefront in Mike's, he's been out there and fighting this for a long time and writing a lot, and he's got a lot of good books out there. And what's his new book?
Alex's new book?
Yeah.
It's the the Deep State. Let me find it again. It's the Deep State is the title, but then the subtitle is the invisible government behind the scenes, in parentheses, constitutional principles.
And that's who I point.
The title alone sums up everything that we're talking about. Yeah.
When I came up against these guys, they came after me, and they still are coming after me, and that's why I put out, hey, I need some help.
Yeah.
Circle the wagon, so to speak. But
absolutely. And that's something that the more people understand about our Constitution and about how our government works, they can understand how we can stand up for each other in order to defend freedom, because it sets precedents. Yes.
But my point was that I've come up against some of these individuals and identified who they are, like Archie Morgan IV, who's related to JP Morgan, who went to my academy at Kings Point.
Right.
They're using our, not just admissions too, but attendance and graduation from our federal military service academies to inculcate those who would better serve, whether they know it or not, or realize it or not. And Archie Morgan does. He's the heir apparent to JP Morgan, who helped start our Civil War as an agent for the crown. And that's where I'm pointing to.
And let me just interject on that, because it's very relevant to what's going on today. So they want to interject war because they want to breed chaos. It makes us weaker as a nation. And I think that's really important for, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. So it's really important for people to understand that these foreign adversaries and these, agents, like you're saying, are trying to instill chaos and divide us. You love to say it, like a house divided cannot stand. So
right. And that's why they have the Democratic Party against the Republican Party when it was one and the same.
Right.
The Democratic Republican Party under Jefferson. They and in World War II, and you point to and you could throw the Cold War and World War I and more in, to where they use the national security umbrella as a land bridge, so to speak, from nation to nation, where the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Catholic Church, helped funnel Nazis from Nazi Germany into the United States and throughout the world through something called paperclip.
Through something called what?
Paperclip. You've never heard of paperclip?
Paperclip, yeah. Maybe explain a little bit about it. We have 3 minutes before he should come on, so.
Now you got me all tongue-tied because Alex is coming on, and I'm like,
I'm sorry.
But the thing before any of that is I'd like to touch on is that you've targeted, for want of a better term, and it's I guess an appropriate term, what's going on with China and Feinstein's chauffeur and Swalwell and all of these people out here in California who are sitting in seats of public power and trust, who have been compromised by the Chinese spies, by the Chinese government, the CCP.
Absolutely.
And then I'm trying to take that and, this is going on the Western front, so to speak, out here in California.
Yeah.
And China's deeply involved, but behind that, and if you look to Hutchinson Whampoa and other things that I've talked about and brought up and discussed with you, it was actually a British corporation taken over by the Chinese, run by the People's Liberation Army, the Army of China, of the CCP, that George W. Bush tried to turn scanning of our cargo over to the Chinese. And that was George Bush, and he's a Republican.
Right.
And he's also a Habsburg. He's related to,
he's a Republican. He's definitely part of the deep state. That
yes.
that the term
he's
that we
an
use.
Agent for foreign powers, and and he became president.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say Ronald Reagan and others too. And I not to, throw some kind of a kerfuffle on people's beliefs and love of certain people and whatever. Right. When you start digging deep and do your homework, and this is one thing, and we could ask Alex about this,
sure,
about getting knighted by the crown and how important.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to hear his thoughts on that. Absolutely.
And the Titles of Nobility Act from 1806 and more. That's
wait, that was 1806.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So it was a year before the Insurrection Act.
Well, and it was also a lead up to...
The Insurrection Act was 1807. I have chills.
Right. Well, yeah, but John Adams, who do you think Adams was? Adams was a royalist, a loyalist. He wanted to be called Your Excellency, the President.
Right. Wow, I really have chills. That's fascinating.
That's how far back it goes.
Well, it's not just how far back it goes, but think about the the relevance of it and how it's intertwined.
Well, and because they've gotten so deep into it is, and people don't realize it's not Democrat against Republican, and it may be or appear to be.
I do want to address, certainly it's not about Republican Democrats currently. I think it's about patriots versus traitors.
Exactly. But you have to know your enemy.
I do want to make one. Yeah, exactly. I do want to make one point, though, is that the communists, which, we can say they're a tool, an agent of the crown, the royalists, the elites. However, they have always aligned with the Democratic Party. They, the Communist Party USA aligned with the Democratic Party in 1919. So almost 100 years, a little over 100 years ago. And they, they've done it through.
But they've infiltrated both parties.
They have infiltrated both parties, but they very formally aligned with the Democratic Party. That also formal allegiances have been with the Democratic Party.
But
the
they
ideologies
also formed
have always
with labor unions, which was
exactly. And their philosophies have also always been aligned with leftist ideology, which makes sense.
And collectivism.
Exactly. All of the schools of thought that came out of the Frankfurt School, which was it started in this country in 1923 at the Institute for Social Research at Columbia University. So, exactly. And those have all come from, they've tied themselves to the Democratic Party. I'm not saying that there haven't been any communist infiltration in the Republican Party. We're seeing that right now, obviously. There's traitors on both sides.
Yeah, and that's my point is trust but verify, Speaking of Columbia University, a book that we've talked about by Columbia law professor Philip Homburger, Is Administrative Law Unlawful? And in his book, he basically says, yes, it is. It's unconstitutional, unlawful.
Sure.
He has a smaller, that's a tough read. It's a larger book, but if you can fight your way through it, I recommend it. But he has a 65-page book called The Administrative Threat. And if you can pick it up, I would, because it gets into one of the larger mechanisms that they have used that results in tyranny, which, we've talked a lot on a number of shows about the three great powers as identified by Montesquieu.
Right.
The legislative that makes the laws, the executive that enforces the laws, and the judicial that decides any disputes from under the law or outside the law.
Right.
And those were brought together under the Federal Administrative Procedure Act of 1947. So for 73 years, we've been living under, not knowing it, tyranny, because even Madison said any two of the great powers together is tyranny. And that was in Federalist number 51, I believe, 1788.
1788. Wow. You bring up a really interesting point. We have talked quite a bit about Montesquieu. And one of the things that during this year, as I've started to dive more into our foundings and the origins of this nation, what I've been so impressed by is just how erudite our founding fathers were. They studied and read so much. They studied ancient civilizations.
But that's the thing, they took and borrowed from a lot of other people.
Yep, absolutely.
And then they added to it.
Absolutely. They also made sure to put provisions against things that they saw went wrong in other societies.
Like the Electoral College, which is a heck of a lot more complex and more protective than people, our whole
genius, truly genius.
Yes.
And I love to talk about how they studied ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And the Electoral College was derived from the awareness that the Athenian didn't really represent most of the country. And that their values were very different from the rural farmer in Greece. And that was one of the core tenets and awarenesses that they came to that helped them to create the Electoral College.
And that's why we have different sized states, and the map looks the way it does.
Exactly.
They could have easily made all of these states the same size in land and or population, but it's a very complex system, which is hard to subvert internally, but they've been working hard at it for, since our inception.
They really have.
And I brought up, and we've talked about before, how when Washington became our first president and set the standard of serving 2 terms and then stepping down,
right?
He also, they tried to put one of their cousins in as our first president rather than Washington. And they've been at this ever since, trying to take back what they see as their land, their property, and not just the land as property, but us, we the people, as their property, because that's their system. We're not sovereigns in our own right. We're not citizens, we're subjects. And we're subject to anything that they wish, because they don't have to follow the law.
Right. And that it is the law that protects the citizens, that protects Americans. Well, and that's why it's so incumbent upon us to understand our laws and our rights and to defend them.
And that was fought for even by Lord Coke in a constitutional monarchy in England. So a lot of the things, and this is an important point, is that England, London, the UK, and or all the protectorates or colonies or nation states or whatever that are part of the United Kingdom, they live in a common law country.
Right.
So do we. Right. Even in a democratic republic, that our courts and what goes on in our courts matters. And this goes to, case precedents and more, like even what's gone on with me, where I've been up against, basically on my own, standing up against a branch of military that I'm not in, that has identified me as a civilian, has used military law and the Military Commissions Act of 2006 and the Military Commissions Act of 2008 and the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which, Obama put in, and the language therein, to say that it's okay to prosecute me, even though there's Supreme Court case law, against this in Reed versus Covert, 1957, that we don't use our military to carry on civilian law enforcement or civilian affairs. And that is exactly what's going on in the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the people that were behind it, and the movement of the Coast Guard into the Department of Homeland Security, not as a civil service, but as a special standalone branch of military that can involve itself in and even adjudicate and promulgate laws from that adjudication, civilian law. And that's not our system by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. Right. Not at all. And that is scary. It's a really
Yes.
scary direction to have gone in. And we need to reverse that.
But Department of Homeland Security needs to be shut down.
Yeah, for sure.
Dissolved. For sure. We were in a better position. And this goes to like even 9/11, the people that, I mean, how can you have an exercise that is identical to 9/11 being run by the federal government at the very same time the same thing happens?
Right.
It's in the 9/11 Commission report, if anybody would pick it up and read it, to where it outlines in details that we were running a live exercise at the time that mirrored exactly what happened on 9/11.
Oh, and when was this?
Right as 9/11 was happening.
So there was a
exercise, a government planned, and they planned, and because even Condoleezza Rice comes in and says, "Oh, there's no way we could have ever imagined that something like this would happen."
Right.
Wait, you guys were running an exercise.
But when did they stage this exercise?
Right as 9/11 was happening. That's why there were people. It's in the 9/11 Commission report. If anybody would bother to pick it up.
How long is this report?
Yeah, it's pretty thick. It's
these reports are always like the stimulus bill, 5,593 pages.
Yeah, which is, but it was done. It was done by the executive branch.
Well, what's so fascinating to me about this is that we're in this quote unquote global pandemic, this unknown novel virus, right? And didn't Gates do Event 201 that finished in October? I think it was like October 19th, the year before, in 2019. I mean, they've been working on it for a few years, but it was finished. It released about a year before this COVID-19 was released. And it was all about this. It was exactly like, what if there was
COVID. I mean, if you think about it, we talked about this.
But my point is just how interesting you're talking about. They were staging this exercise, and then 9/11 happened.
Carrying on. They were
carrying on, and they had done a simulation of what if like a COVID-19 happened, and the next
these are tabletop exercises or whatever.
Yeah, it's a very interesting coincidence. Yeah.
Well, no, and that's because that's who and what is involved is that because even in the middle of 9/11, there were people involved in all of it, whether it was Air Force or whomever, military and or federal personnel, who were saying, is this live? Hold on, sorry.
Okay.
I thought I turned it off.
No worries.
Sorry about that. Who were saying, is this live or is this exercise? Is this live or is this real, or is this part of, and because they were confused, they didn't know.
Right.
That's why like jets were flown out to sea instead of intercepting, the airliners and shooting them down before they hit the buildings, if that was a viable option or so ordered to, save or stop what was going on. Like, and we've talked, like I've mentioned and thrown out to you about the 1993 bombing and how that was done to not only figure out how much explosive was needed to take down the buildings on 9/11, but also to get at the plans for the building, because to take down the building, you need the plans. And I don't care, anybody can say whatever, but at some point, if you want to carry on demolition, which is what happened, there's no way those planes took down the buildings. They were clearly demolished. And that goes to where we're at now. These are the kind of people that we're dealing with that do not think anything of killing other people. In fact, that is their goal. And that was one of the things that Alex Newman said on Mike Adams' program. I don't know what happened to Alex. That wasn't Alex, but you resent the link?
I did. Did you see it? I sent it to you as well.
Yeah. So, and this gets into that, I don't know what is happened with Alex. Oh, you know what probably happened? His wife is having their baby.
Oh, that's
He
right.
said any day. So,
Oh my goodness.
I didn't even think of that. So,
I think he's on number 6.
no, 5.
Oh, I
Yeah, I
thought he
confirmed
had
that.
5, so this would
No,
be
that's what
6.
I thought too, but he's confirmed.
Okay, this is 5. Okay.
That's
Wow.
probably that's
He's doing his part to continue the species because we are dying out.
well, and he even talked about what he's focused on and talking about China and what's going on there and Swalwell and all these other people, Feinstein and more. He did talk about and bring up Cecil Rhodes.
Mm-hmm.
And Cecil Rhodes, if you look into who he is or was an agent for the crown.
Right, and he talks about Cecil Rhodes and the Council for Foreign.
Yeah, the CFR, the Council for
CFR.
Foreign Relations, and also, you could talk about blood diamonds or diamonds, De Beers, and more.
Right.
It's much like the Rothschilds in gold.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that they're doing right now. Like Cerebus, the three-headed dog that guards Hades, this investment corporation, much like the Carlyle Group,
Right.
bought Albertsons. And so what they're doing is they're taking, like for gold and the Rothschilds and others, because it's not just the Rothschilds. There's plenty of other people that are making money off of all the machinations that they're playing out in the market and wherever, and even in production and mining, to where they take the gold off of the market to play with market dynamics and supply and demand to raise the price artificially, so that now the gold or diamonds that they just took off the market and put in their own vaults is worth a lot more, and they don't even have to mine because they can make a heck of a lot more money by playing with market dynamics, which is like what Enron did
by manipulating the supply.
Yeah, supply and demand economics.
Yeah,
and that's what's going on, like food, water, energy, etc., to where they're manipulating the market, and they're even using things like the story or tale or fable or theology, whatever you want to call it, about the Antichrist, and taking that, seizing that, and using it to scare the crap out of people. And is that a bad word? Is that one of those 7 dwarfs that is like Carlin talked about? I don't know if crap qualifies, but if I use a different term,
I'm not sure.
I don't think crap does, but
I don't think that's officially like a profanity.
But SHI would probably
right. That might qualify.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about my last name, SHINE. Yeah, no, I'm disappointed that we don't have Alex.
I know. I'm checking, but
and hopefully his wife is beyond the birth of their new child.
Yes.
I think he said it was a baby boy. They had done ultrasound or so I don't know if that's what's going on, or if we just have a glitch in the ghost in the system, or
yeah, I mean, I haven't seen him come through, so
so congratulations on your baby, if that's what happened.
If that hopefully that is what it is, and then that would be great reason for him not to be here. And
let's continue to talk about the one thing that we discussed off air in advance and in other programs, and I know you want to focus on, to a degree, of course, China and what's going on with it. And I think it's much more in your face,
right?
Because of the difference. We have a lot of Chinese here in America.
Of course, yeah. But the Chinese Americans are not that's not what we're discussing. The issue is the CCP and the
and I would qualify that myself, because there are people like the guy who started Zoom, who was a Chinese. I mean, even the Carol C. Lamb, the U.S. attorney involved in my stuff, she was she's now lead or counsel for Qualcomm. She was a U.S.
Wait, is this the same Lamb? Isn't she part of the the CFR and the
She's
CCP?
totally like co-opted. She's CCP, if you want to get my, because she blocked me from getting into federal court, and she was fired by Bush, and I don't think it was a straight up like, hey, you're not doing good, you're fired. I think it was more to give her cover. She goes to work as legal counsel in China for Qualcomm.
Right.
But she was born in China, and nothing against that. But if you come to America, you're supposed to protect and defend our Constitution and Bill of Rights and our way of life,
right?
Not be involved in attacking it. And this is where it kind of goes to the bigger issue, like what you've talked about, and what I've talked about, is the marriage of China and Chinese nationals who are more beholden to China than the United States.
Right.
Which is the same thing. And I think it's more insidious and more dangerous. And I hate to throw the term out, but I didn't create it. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which is, Saxe, Coburg, Gotha, people who are German or of German ancestry, or even European, who have come to the United States or been in the United States, even from our Revolutionary War, and their families and brothers, sisters, uncles, mothers, cousins, not all of them, are more beholden to and like living in a kingdom rather than in a constitutional republic. And that there's and I believe it's more insidious, like you pointed out. China's in your face. The chauffeur for Dianne Feinstein was a Chinese spy for 20 years and chauffeuring her around. And that's just a small, even Swalwell, it doesn't go to his time in
literally in bed with the Chinese spy. Yeah.
For decades, it appears. But this other hand in all of this, and I believe that they are, even like with Hitler, there was a lot of Americans like Walt Disney, who helped fund the brown shirts in Nazi Germany. The Bushes, they had 3 companies. Hamburg America Lines was one. Union Banking Corporation, I believe, was another. And there's a third that were seized by FDR for trading with the Nazis.
Wow.
In the middle of World War II. And we know Samuel and Prescott Bush were war profiteers.
Right.
Like, I'm trying to think of the Dresden was the one city supposedly in Europe that didn't get, or no, Dresden was carpet bombed, but it was Warburg, his building somehow was the only thing left standing in Dresden.
Oh, interesting.
And whether it's a euphemism to show how much power these people have allegedly or in reality,
right?
They do. But the key is, and this is something that Alex really, hit on, was that they're evil. And I'm not like, mincing words here.
Yeah.
They are believers of a death cult. They are involved in and want people dead, not alive. They're on the pro-choice side of abortion, to where they would rather see, regardless, they would rather see babies killed.
Right. And I do think in general, like regardless of one's beliefs, this is very much a spiritual battle between good versus evil. And I think it is, even in the ideological sense, what we're seeing is a war on free will. And free will is
enslavement. They want to enslave us to a molecular level.
Exactly. And
DNA, RNA.
And free will is what defines humans. Human beings have free will. That is what that is the epitome of being human.
It's God-given.
Exactly.
I always say inalienable, but I guess the
inalienable, right? But that is woven into the fabric of our founding documents. That is one of the core tenets. We are founded on Judeo-Christian values, regardless of whether you subscribe to, whether you're a Jew or a Christian. Those values and those principles are what the founding documents are based upon, and they drive, Judeo-Christian values, and they drive the principles of our society and of our laws. And one of those primary tenets is that we are endowed with inalienable rights, but it is up to the free will However, it's up to the free will of man to defend those rights. And the way
As
we
an
do that is
example,
by understanding our rights and understanding our Constitution.
you and someone else cannot agree to violate the 13th Amendment against slavery. You cannot even if you come into a contract, erringly or not, or agree, you both agree to it, that's
Right.
illegal. You can't override the 13th Amendment yourself.
Right.
It's the same thing like a law.
Exactly.
If you cannot work with someone else, it's called conspiracy, to commit fraud or whatever.
Yeah, the buzzword of 2020.
Yeah, right. That a conspiracy theorist is
it was a term weaponized by the CIA actually in 1967. Yeah, and it's basically
they used it against me.
It was just a variation of Herbert Marcuse's liberating tolerance. And in Herbert Marcuse's liberating tolerance, he literally said, you accept everything that comes from the left and you reject everything from the right. I believe we have Alex here.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah. So
thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. What a way to start the new year. I am so honored to have you on, Alex. I really, really, truly appreciate your work and your commitment to journalistic integrity and standing for traditional American values. I feel like that's kind of lost lately.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here as well.
I'd like to bring up your latest book coming out. I'm just going to throw out some stuff real quick. We saw your video with Mike Adams, which was stellar. I think I'd like to know that. And Mike is a true champion as well.
Yes,
if anybody doesn't know about Mike Adams, check him out and check out your interview on there. But in there, you talked about China a lot, but you also touched on Cecil Rhodes. And I would like to, if you can marry China together and our old adversaries, and I would say Europe as a whole, but I point more to, and you mentioned Cecil Rhodes and what Rhodes was all about. I say that Rhodes was an agent of the crown, and that a lot of what we're dealing with right now is, and Sidney Powell just mentioned that in an interview about, she believes that it wasn't just MI6 retired, that it was the British government that was deeply involved, not only in the Steele dossier, but I say a lot of what is going on now in the world, if not here in America. But I would also throw out names like JP Morgan and others, and then throw it back to you.
Yeah, no, that all sounds excellent. And, I've spent quite a bit of time looking into Cecil Rhodes, and I think you're right. I think the connection with the British crown is clear. And so is the connection with the Rothschild banking dynasty.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize that he got a lot of his funding for his mining empire straight from the Rothschild dynasty.
Well, the Rothschilds also JP Morgan, because it was JP Morgan that helped incite our Civil War, funded both sides of the Civil War, profited from both sides of the Civil War, took down American financial houses at the time and restored them to, crown possessions, and was backed by his father, who was an English banker backed by the crown. And I would throw out also Rupert Murdoch in all of this, and why people are complaining about our media and why they're backing, certain positions.
So
absolutely. Thank you.
One of the things that we were discussing before you came on is that I think you might be really great at kind of explaining it's a very deep interweb that we're dealing with currently. And I think certainly this year, a lot of people have become aware of the threat that is communist China, the CCP. People are becoming much more aware of that, but I don't think that they're necessarily aware of the exact ties to the deep state, the ties to, and how China or the CCP or even the communist philosophy and ideology is being used as a tool by, more totalitarian, authoritarian regimes and royalists and,
well, that's a great topic of discussion, and it's an area that I've studied a lot. I've actually got quite a few books behind me on that exact topic. There's Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, right?
Okay. Yeah. So the Bolshevik Revolution, and actually that was something else we were also just discussing, was how, right after the Bolshevik Revolution, and I think it was, in the early 1900s, I think it was Lenin who had a meeting with Willy Munzenberg and Antonio Gramsci, and he didn't understand why this wasn't spreading all throughout the West, all through Europe. He's like, great, we had this revolution, it was successful here. And it was Antonio Gramsci who kept saying, because it can't be an economic revolution or a physical, revolution. It has to be through the culture. And that was when they came, the Institute for Social Research in 1923 in Columbia University. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit of how this is all intertwined?
The big picture.
I'd love to. So awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you see as, how are they connected? Like, how has communist China been used as a tool?
Are we recording already? Oh my goodness. So communist China, I think really needs to be understood as not just a partner of the deep state in the United States, but even a tool of the deep state in the United States. And really this goes back to the very beginning. The communists never would have been able to enslave China without the deliberate and crucial assistance of what I call the deep state in the Western world, or the deep state behind the deep state. And some very concrete, specific examples, probably the most notorious of them would be the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. His name was George Marshall. And he was instrumental in betraying our allies. So Chiang Kai-shek was the ruler of Free China, and he had helped us defeat the Japanese during World War II. He was fighting against the communists very successfully. He actually wanted to help us beat back the communists in Korea, and the treasonous subversives within the Council on Foreign Relations and our government said, no. In fact, we're going to blockade that so that you can't even send your forces to come and help us. Unbelievable what they did. They disarmed him. They put an arms embargo on him. They stabbed him in the back. Our Congress had actually authorized massive military assistance for Chiang Kai-shek. And instead of providing that as required, the executive branch of the government, filled with members of the Council on Foreign Relations, said, no, we're not going to send any. When they did finally send some, it was just garbage stuff that they had no use for. So, and there was one more critical piece to this as well, again, with the crucial assistance of the deep state. So the subversives in our government encouraged Stalin and allowed Stalin to declare a war on Japan literally right before the United States dropped the nuclear bomb on them. They knew very well the war was going to be completely and totally finished after those bombs were dropped, but they invited Stalin to declare war just moments before all of that happened. That meant once Japan was defeated, Soviet Russia was considered one of the victors. And so what happened, as one of the victors, Stalin got to occupy his piece of the former Japanese territories, especially Manchuria, where the Japanese had enormous stockpiles of weaponry, of food, of armaments, of ammunition. And so Stalin got to march right into Manchuria and, hey, look at all these military supplies. Let's hand them over to Chairman Mao. Suddenly, the mass murdering, butchering communists had all this military material. Chiang Kai-shek, on the other hand, was disarmed by these same subversives. And so that enabled Mao to come to power. And then at every step along the way, from that point up until today, the globalists in the West have been aiding and abetting communist China. One of the ways that they did it, this was especially ridiculous, was to say, well, hey, we need to, the Soviets came up with this Sino-Soviet split. And there was a defector. I've actually got a couple of his books behind me. New Lies for Old is one of them. Another is The Perestroika Deception. His name was Anatoly Golitsyn. He was in Department D of the KGB back in the 1960s and in the 70s. And what he said was, this is the disinformation department of the KGB. And so they were coming up with strategies to deceive the Western world. One of those strategies was to play up this Sino-Soviet split. Of course, the communists were always working together, but they told the idiots in the West, the gullible population, the traitors in the deep state already knew full well what was going on. But they said, oh, the Soviet communists don't get along with the Chinese communists. And so our government, the subversives within our government, used that as an excuse. Well, hey, let's build up China so that they can turn away from the Soviets. Unbelievable deception that happened. Anatoly Golitsyn said that was 100% a disinformation operation. One more interesting thing he said on this subject of deception. And he predicted this many, many years before it happened. Actually, these books were published in the early 1980s. He said there's going to be a phony, fraudulent collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. That's going to be followed by a phony, fraudulent collapse in the Soviet bloc. All along, the communists are going to retain power. He even identified some of the specific people. He said Lech Walesa, for example, the Polish anti-communist hero, was working with the Soviets. And people said, oh, how ridiculous. That's the dumbest. How could he possibly accuse this heroic man of being a Soviet agent? Of course, now the documents have come out. Lech Walesa's code name with the KGB was Bolek, so we know exactly what was going on. He made something like 205 specific predictions, and of those, almost 200 have now come to pass. He had an incredible track record. And so you have, if we go back even further, from the very beginning, from the first revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, the first successful communist revolution, we have documents from our State Department, from the bankers involved, showing that it was funded and largely controlled by very powerful financial interests in Wall Street, very powerful financial interests in Germany. And so, the history of communism is really a history of the elites using this fraudulent so-called ideology as a cover story for enslaving people, for destroying nations, for stealing freedom. And that brings us to today, where you have these maniacs running around in our streets, Pantifa and Black Lives Matter, the Marxist organization. I think many of them, the ones out in the street burning buildings and looting and killing, they don't realize that they're being played. But at the upper levels, it is and always has been a movement of the uber elites. And, it's been the case from the beginning.
Wow.
Well, real quick, if I could throw in on that was, and I know you're probably aware of it, but if you could touch on, because I'm saying the deep state is the royals or royalists and or their agents, whether it be Rothschilds or Morgan, et cetera, even Rupert Murdoch, to where it is England, the German or British royal crown, the Windsors, who are Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, who are Habsburgs. And in, I don't know if you know of Philip Bobbitt, he wrote The Shield of Achilles, War, Peace, and the Course of History. In it, he talks about the Habsburgs controlling European history for the last 1,300 years. And, Obama is ninth cousin twice removed to George W. Bush. Bush's father was knighted by the crown. Reagan was knighted by the crown. And that's actually one thing I would ask that you touch on, if you would, about how important, going to Titles of Nobility Act of 1806 and more, how important it is that being knighted by the crown does mean something.
Yeah, I think the British crown is and has been a critical component of the deep state going back centuries, certainly. And, I don't view necessarily the monarch to be the head of the deep state. In my view, I really look at this through a biblical lens. In my perspective, Satan is really their commander in chief, and he's got, a lot of minions, very much including very powerful people, including monarchs, including presidents, including prime ministers and things like that. But it's undeniable that the British crown has been critical. And this is clear even to this day, right? When they announced the Great Reset last June, in June of 2020, they had 4 key speakers who were there to make the announcement. You had the head of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. The guy's just like a cartoon villain. He's so ridiculous. You had the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, a self-proclaimed socialist. He was actually the leader of the Socialist International, probably the most important alliance of Marxist, socialist, communist parties on planet Earth today. You had the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, who comes from the gangster state of Bulgaria, which, as we were just talking about earlier, despite the ostensible collapse of communism, the communists were never punished, right? They just kind of shape-shifted, and now they're CEOs and politicians and all the rest of it, but it's still the same criminals, still the exact same criminals. So you've got Kristalina Georgieva, who's running the IMF, and then you had Prince Charles as the 4th, who says, hey, we need to reset everything. We don't have time to think about this. You just need to do what we say. So it's very clear that they're a part of this. The alliance between the Rothschilds and the British monarchy goes back at least 2 centuries. It was actually the Rothschilds who helped ensure the British victory over Napoleon's forces. And they brag about this. It's pretty open. They put their financial weight behind Britain and thereby decided the fate of the war between the 2 most powerful governments on the planet at that time. And, of course, they have operations and agents in France, and they have in Germany and all over the place. They funded George Soros. So it really is this
funded George
enormous disgust.
No.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. In fact, the George Soros operation got its start with Rothschild money. That money came through the Banque Privée in Switzerland back in the late 1960s. They put massive amounts of money into Soros's quantum fund. And then you started seeing these incredible returns on this money. And the way they do, and, I don't have to be worried about being sued for libel here. George Soros has been convicted of insider trading. So if he wants to come sue me, I'll say, hey, look, you were convicted in a court of law for insider trading. That's really how these people make their money. They know what's going to happen in the market. So, hey, they can put $1 billion bet on something knowing full well what's going to happen because they're going to be the ones moving the market. And boom.
They know because they've manipulated it.
Precisely. They control the central banks. I called the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta years ago. I was like, look, I keep hearing that you guys are privately owned. Like, what's the story? Are you guys privately owned? They put me in touch. Oh, yeah, we are. So I said, who owns you? Well, our member banks. Well, who are your member banks? Well, any banks in this region who want to own shares in the Federal Reserve, who are subject to our regulation and all the rest of it. And they choose our board members, and they elect our president, and they choose our policies, and we pay them dividends, right? So we do have a private banking cartel, very much affiliated with the Rothschilds, very much affiliated with the ruling classes of Europe that go back centuries, that are at war with humanity, that are at war with the concept of a constitution. They never forgave us for saying, hey, we don't want any part of that. We're going to set up a new government. God gave us rights. We don't respect you. We don't honor your phony laws. They never forgave us. And so they're still after us to this day. They think they can taste victory. Whether they'll get it, I think, is in God's hands at this point, but it's not an excuse to lay down and quit fighting. But it's a crazy time.
Well, you did mention too about on Mike Adams' program or interview that these people are evil, and I need to touch on that because whether you are faith-based or not, you need to realize that these people are your enemy. They are evil, and they want you dead. All of us. They want all of us dead. I mean, they are members of a death cult for.
Precisely. And that's not speculation. We've got video, right? We've got video of their little rituals at the Bohemian Grove, sacrificing what they claim is a human effigy, an effigy of a child in front of a 40-foot stone owl, and chanting about forest spirits and is going to set us free and all this nonsense. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. If you approach this from a secular perspective, I don't know how you explain that stuff. It's just frankly very weird. And the same thing with the Skull and Bones. Right. Yeah. Skull and Bones is another great example. You've got these weirdos doing death rituals and mock sacrifices and laying in coffins and masturbating and kissing skulls. You're like, what in the world is going on here? So to me, it's crystal clear. These people are evil. They're absolutely evil to their core. And I think the Bible really gives us the best explanation. When you read the Bible and you look at reality, they match up perfectly. The Bible talks about this spiritual war that has been ongoing from the time that Satan deceived Eve, right? For example, in Ephesians 6:12 is a verse I go to a lot. It talks about we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, against principalities, against spiritual wickedness, the forces of darkness in high places. We're talking about Satan and demons and their minions on this planet. And, the Bible gives very, very clear definitions on who's who, what their objective is. They hate God. They hate the church. They hate everything that God has defined as good, they view as evil. Everything that God has defined as evil, they view as good. That's why they love abortion and sacrificing babies. That's why they love lying and stealing and war and plundering and every wicked thing you can think of. That's why they're teaching our children that they can chop off their private parts and become a new gender. It's because they're sick. They are servants of the rulers of darkness.
And they love to torture.
They do. They absolutely do. And I mean, this came out that our government was involved in this, and nobody was prosecuted for this, or actually they hacked into the computer systems of the congressional committee that was investigating this. That all came out. Again, nobody was prosecuted. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. But there is really good news for those of you who are Christian. You just turn to the end of the book and you see how this ends. It's not going to go well for the people who refuse to repent of this evil that they're involved in. And their day is coming. Every day that passes, we're one day closer to that. And I don't know when it's coming, but it is coming. So
thank you for that. Let's really hope. One thing you did say, and we were touching on this a little bit before you got on, is that you said that this is that you believe in God's hands. And one of the things we were talking about is how this country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And, that's regardless of whether you are a Jew or a Christian, those principles are woven into our founding documents. And one of those main principles is that we are endowed with inalienable rights. However, it's my belief that it is incumbent upon the will of man to defend those rights, because God, or whatever your belief may be, gave us free will. So what do you think? We're seeing so much corruption right now. We're seeing so much evil, for lack of a better way of putting it. What I do think it is the responsibility. I personally believe that this country was divine intervention against tyrannical forces. We have free will embedded into the culture of our society and our laws. So I think it's incumbent upon citizens to defend that. What do you think that we as Americans can do to preserve the free will of humanity?
I couldn't agree with you more. Every word you just said, beautifully spoken, absolutely correct. And if you go back and you study the real history of the United States, the real history of our founding, it bears almost no resemblance to the garbage they teach the poor children in the government brainwash camps today. But what they actually got these principles straight out of the Bible. Right. Sam Adams, who's considered the father of the revolution, he created the committees of correspondence. If you read his writings, and I encourage everybody, just go to the primary source documents, turn off the TV, shut down the fake textbooks from the school, and just read what they wrote. Sam Adams said, if you want to know what are the God-given rights of mankind, all you got to do is open up your Bible. Just open up your New Testament, and they're listed right there. Every man has a right to life. Every man has a right to liberty. Everybody has a right to the pursuit of happiness and to property. And these are, even non-Christians know these things, right? God said, thou shalt not murder. That means nobody has a right to your life. God said, thou shalt not steal. Nobody has a right to your property. So they distilled these principles out of the Bible. They said, look, this king is a tyrant. They believed that rebellion against tyrants is obedience to God. And they said, we're not going to put up with it. So they appealed to the king. He ignored them. They appealed to the parliament. The parliament ignored them. They appealed to the puppet judges of the crown. They ignored them. And they said, finally, you know what? We're done. We're going to appeal to heaven. That was actually our first flag, appeal to heaven with the little Christmas tree on it. They said, we're going to appeal. And they said this in the Declaration of Independence. We're appealing to the supreme judge of the universe because the king won't listen and the parliament won't listen. Well, the supreme judge of the universe did listen. And so you had this most ridiculous, this absurd situation where a bunch of ragtag farmers and rebels we're going to go up against the most powerful empire really in the history of the planet. With warships, they could have decimated any civilization on Earth. They said, well, we're going to go up against you, and we've got our squirrel shooters here, and we don't have uniforms yet, but we're going to hide behind the trees, and we're going to take pot shots at you. And they won. So I think their appeal to heaven was successful. And I think we're in another one of those moments right now. We've appealed to the Supreme Court. We've appealed to the Congress. We've appealed to the Department of Justice. We've appealed to the FBI, and they ignore us at every point. In fact, they just make the tyranny more brutal, and they offend us worse, and they spit in our faces. And so now I think we're in another time in American history where, hey, we need to appeal to heaven, let God wipe it all clean. But you're right, Courtney, we have an obligation to defend our liberties. And if we don't, then, don't go blaming anybody else for losing your liberties. Yeah, you can whine about Congress, you can whine about the Supreme Court, but if you aren't involved in trying to protect your rights and trying to defend our liberties and defend our civilization, then you're just as guilty as Congress and the Supreme Court. So we all have a duty to do that. As for what we can do, I think it really starts with an awareness that we need to be praying. We need to ask for God's intervention because what we're dealing with is so huge. It's so monstrous. They've got control of Congress and the Supreme Court and the fake media and the schools. They've got this huge arsenal arrayed against us, but God laughs at these things, right? It tells us in Psalm 2, verse 4, God laughs at these little tyrants and their conspiracies to wage war against God's people. He laughs at this. So we need to appeal to him. We also need to understand, I think, some elements of military strategy. And I'm not advocating armed rebellion in any sense. In fact, at this point, I think it would be beyond futile. The weapons of today really are not anymore firearms and things like that. Now we've got jet planes, we've got drones, we've got cyber warfare. It's really a very different time than it was during our founding era. But we do need to understand some basic concepts of military strategy. And I go back to Sun Tzu. I say this all the time. I feel like a broken record. But we need to understand, Sun Tzu explained, if you don't know yourself, you don't know your enemy, you're going to lose every battle. If you want to win every battle, the first thing you need to do is you need to know who you are, what are your capabilities, and this begins with an understanding of our history. What does it mean to be an American? What is America even supposed to be? What does it say in our founding documents? What did our founders believe? Why did we declare independence? These are fundamental things that we must know. And as sad as it is, your average American today is completely clueless about these things. So it begins with educating ourselves about who we are as a people, as a nation, and then we need to know who is the enemy. The enemy, for simplicity's sake, I call it the deep state. Here we go. I just released a book on the deep state. If anybody's interested, it's called Deep State, the Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. Just a handy, very, very simple. It's nothing complicated. A fifth grader could read it, but it gives you a really good overview of what we're dealing with. So I go through the Council on Foreign Relations, and their affiliate, the Royal Institute for International Affairs in the UK. I go through the Bilderbergs, the Trilateral Commission, the important organizations that you need to know of, and then how they operate, how they deceive us, how they wage war on our societies and our freedoms. And then the third section is, how do we fight back against this? And so, aside from knowing the enemy, knowing ourselves, I think one of the most important things that an average person can do, everybody wants some like silver bullet and, we're just going to solve it by doing this one little thing. It's not going to happen. It's not that simple. But I think, and it used to be very controversial. It used to be very fringe to say this. Now it's kind of moved into the mainstream. You've got to get your children out of the government's indoctrination centers. That is why we have become a nation of idiots. That is why our children hate their country and hate their family and hate the church and hate liberty and want to burn down buildings and get rid of free speech. It's because they've been brainwashed. They've been dumbed down. Most of them can't even read their high school diplomas properly. That's the reality of America today. So parents, it sounds so simple. I know it's hard. I know it means less money. I know it means you're going to have to live in a smaller house and drive an older car. Guess what? Your kids are worth it. Your country is worth it. And so I tell people that maybe the most important thing that an average everyday parent can do is just get your children out of the system, homeschool them, find a good private school, not one of these elite, ritzy private schools training the future managerial class of the New World Order, but a good, school that teaches critical thinking, classical education. And so, I'll leave it with that. I could ramble on about this for ages, but I think those are the key points. So,
thank you so much.
Amen.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Amen. Very well said. And I couldn't agree more with all of that. I guess maybe to wrap this up, one of the things I'd like to talk about is we have Crucial Day coming up. I'm actually going to DC next week for the 6th. Yes. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what's going to happen on the 6th and moving forward. Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear you'll be in DC. I would be there if not for baby is scheduled to arrive the very next day, and that means baby could arrive a week before, a week later. So I better not leave my wife.
Good reason.
She would be very mad at me. She's very understanding, but not that understanding. And so, I think there's a real chance for some interesting things to happen on January 6th. I was very pleased to see Senator Josh Hawley say he was going to challenge. So now we have both houses. We have a challenge in both houses of Congress. They're going to have to address that. I know a lot of people are counting on Pence to do the right thing. I would not hold my breath counting on Pence to do the right thing. I've been saying this.
They've gotten a lot of flack for saying it, but yeah.
But it's true.
I hope he does. But
I do too. But you know what? I wrote an article right when Trump named him, and I said, look, this guy's got a very checkered past. Yeah, he talks like us. Yeah, he says the right things. He knows what to say to win an election. However, right, his rhetoric doesn't match his actions. He was a big supporter of these globalist trade deals. He betrayed the conservatives in Indiana when he was governor on these LGBT issues. First it looked like he was going to come through, and then, just kidding. Now it's going to be worse than it was before. Yeah. So I wouldn't trust Pence to step in and save the day. But there is a real chance for some significant things to happen on January 6th. And I still think there's a decent chance that Trump will serve another term in office. So, but it's going to take everybody being involved. The Supreme Court's not going to save you. Congress is not going to save you. Even Trump is not going to save us. But incredible things do happen. There's a lot of people praying, and I hope everybody will be involved. Going to DC is a good thing. I will say one word of caution about going to DC, and I don't mean this in any way to dissuade people. I want people to go. But I was speaking with some medical doctors, some of whom have been advising the White House on these issues. And one of the things that they've been warning me about for months was a COVID-20 or a COVID-21 emerging. It looks like we may be there now with this new strain. Maybe it's not this one. And one of the things that one of these doctors said to me that really stuck with me was, hey, What if everybody goes to DC and gets this new COVID, then goes home and infects their family and all their Trump supporters? We'll have 80 million Trump supporters who are sick on January 20th when we might really, really need them to come together. And so I tell people, quit listening to the mainstream media about COVID. If you can find a way, get yourself some hydroxychloroquine. I'm not a doctor, but I've interviewed many, many, many doctors. I've got a supply for myself prescribed by a doctor. There's lots of different doctors who will prescribe it. So find a way to get some of that. Make sure you've got a good supply of zinc and some vitamin D, because you can beat this thing, in fact, fairly easily, but you can't do it the way the media wants you to do it. The media would be just as happy to see us all dead. And so turn off the TV. Go listen to Dr. Zelenko, right? He's been working with the White House for a long time now. He has a treatment regimen that has been phenomenal in terms of results when treating coronavirus cases. So listen to some of these real medical, his Twitter just got deleted, so you might have to look kind of hard to find it, but there are good medical professionals out there giving good medical advice. And I encourage all Trump supporters, God bless you. Thank you for going to DC on January 6th, but take some medical precautions just in case.
Absolutely.
Amen again.
Thank you. Well, I do want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for coming today. Do you have anything you want to leave us with? Any final closing words of wisdom?
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. If people want to find more, I'm the senior editor at the New American Magazine. If you don't subscribe yet, it's a great publication. It goes out twice a month. You can sign up and it'll come to you in the mail, and you can get the daily headlines in your email. I'm the founder and editor of Liberty Sentinel. It's my personal website. I just post stuff up there, either that I write or that people I know write that I think is important. I write for the Epic Times. I write for WorldNet Daily and Freedom Project Media. You can find me on all the social medias. I'm spending more and more time on Parler and less on Facebook and Twitter. But, if people want more, you can always get in touch with me all those ways. And I thank you once again, Eric and Courtney. Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you for what you're doing. God bless you guys. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. Eric, do you have anything final you want to ask or add?
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
I don't know how I can follow up on that, except, God bless for all your hard work, everything that you've written, all that you're doing. One man can make a difference. And, what is the old adage of all that is required for evil men to succeed is for good men, and I would include good women like Courtney and others, to do nothing.
Yes.
That's right. Amen. Yeah. So, and I encourage everybody, just get involved. Everybody can do something, and all of us together can have a really significant impact in turning this around, defeating this evil, restoring our liberties, restoring our republic, and creating a better future for our children and our grandchildren. So
absolutely. And I think one more thing. Sorry.
A request, Alex, if you could, is start bringing up about the Merchant Marine, American flag shipping, because it's such an important point. And if it becomes a kinetic war with China or whomever, our Merchant Marine has been decimated. 97% of international cargo is going by foreign flag, coming and going into the United States. So
that's crazy. I did not know that. I appreciate the information, though. And if you have more, please send it over to me. I'd love to learn more on that. So.
And I guess on that note, there is just one more thing I would like to end on is that, let's hope that on the 6th that we have really good news and moving forward for our nation and for the free will of humanity. But if perchance the 6th does not go as we hope, what do you see that there are still paths and, good possibilities moving forward and what we can do then?
Yeah, there's a lot of military people who are urging the president to consider invoking the Insurrection Act. I've interviewed some very knowledgeable people on this topic, and they've suggested that not only would be his right and his prerogative to do that, but maybe his duty. What they explain is that we're actually in a war here. This is a war. Communist China and a treasonous fifth column in the United States is trying to hijack our country. We cannot let them get their hands on our armed forces. It's critical. And, other than that, I tell people too, you got to pray, because this is an incredibly serious situation. We're going to need God's assistance if we're going to come out of the other end okay. So
God bless. Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you, guys. God bless you too.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Happy New Year, and congrats on your 5th child, is it?
Soon to be
that's right, yeah. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Happy New Year to you too.
Happy New Year. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. Well, that was
we're still live and recording, right?
You're still live and recording. That was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anything we can do to get him out more and get him heard, because he's so articulate, he's so well read, so well written. He knows about the bigger picture and what's going on.
Absolutely.
And I think it is, he touches on it being evil, and that a lot of these people from, as you call them, the left, and I'll use
the left in terms of the ideology.
Yeah,
you're just teasing me now. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just giving you a hard time again, but that it really is,
it wouldn't be a good co-host relationship if you didn't, I think that's part of the course. Yeah. So
that tension. The point was that it is, I don't want to say faith-based, whatever your faith is, that's up to you.
Sure.
But it is about the bigger picture. And if you want to remove names and Christianity and Muslim and whatever, this is about good and evil.
It absolutely is about good and evil. I think that is it.
Nazi Germany was about good and evil.
It's incontrovertible. And, as much as, communism is a part of this whole thing, it's a part of this bigger web, as we were just talking about. However, we have seen that communism has been the tool that led to hundreds of millions of deaths. It always does, every time. And that's evil. I don't know any other way to describe evil than to kill hundreds of millions of people.
Well, and they're taking our civil defense systems, like in ancient times in a kingdom, it was the wall and the moat and more. Those were civil defense systems.
Right.
To where those that are carrying this on have not only infiltrated, like the Chinese have more recently, our government, and have taken it over and done things like passing the Federal Administrative Procedure Act, or Title V, in 1947, where it married all three of the great powers together under one branch, under the executive branch. And that was 73 years ago.
Right.
So it's like people are waking up now, and you better start studying hard and start working hard and start waking up real quick, because we're so far down that slippery slope that, we're to the point of
it's time for us to fight back.
Side,
Don't disappear.
Yeah.
It is time for us to fight back. I think that, we can probably wrap up on that. I think that it's time to fight back. People need to be educated. They need to understand what their rights are and what their liberties are, and we need to defend them before they're gone.
And this is, we've talked about circle the wagons, like even around myself in the position
absolutely
I put myself in. But even like with Alex, a simple one is to buy his books.
Yep.
Promote him.
And I think that absolutely is, to speak to your point about Circle of Wagons and about supporting, we need to support patriots. I think that is really important. We need to get people out there to create a Circle of Wagons around you to help you out and, defend you. And we need to support, people like Alex who are putting forth really good and valuable information and standing for traditional American values, and really a huge part of restoring America, because America is not just it's not a land, it's an idea, it's a concept.
Exactly.
And if the
freedom,
exactly, freedom. And if the ideas die and the people let those ideas die, America dies, and we can't let that happen, because America stands for the free will of humanity.
Well, and America has been set up, and I believe it's by our founders and all those who supported them, because they didn't do it alone. Just like these people have not done this alone. They haven't.
Nobody does it alone, and that is why it's so important to support people like you, support people like him, support my show,
Courtenay Turner, the Courtenay Turner podcast, and our new. We still haven't come up with a name, but we just
we'll take suggestions. We'll put this out there, and maybe some of our audience will have some ideas for us. If not,
anyone who has any tech skills, because we've talked about looking for an executive producer, funding, GoFundMe page, et cetera, website, and more. to be able to get editor, to be able to get your podcast and our podcast out, and to the general public much quicker, much broader, more refined, and hopefully I can do something about my lighting and other
a little production value goes along.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yes. So all right. So
this is
can we
January 1st.
I'm
New
sorry.
Year's Day.
Yes.
First,
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. What an amazing way to start the year.
Exactly.
Tell people where they can find you.
Through Courtenay Turner podcast.
Yes, Courtenay Turner podcast.
I mean, I'm out there. People can find me, but probably the best, and I hate to be a little standoffish, is, you know, I'm coming under quote unquote friendly fire.
Absolutely.
You know,
so for right now, we'll have it under the Courtenay Turner podcast. You can all find me.
Reach out to Courtenay, and
yeah,
they can pass on information and stuff. And but I do need just to end it with this. This is how corrupt and how evil these people are. They've used administrative law, which shouldn't exist. It's unconstitutional. You can go to Philip Homburger, and his book is Administrative Law Unlawful.
Right.
They created it 73 years ago. We've been living under it for that long. It marries the three great powers together. But a civil service in the federal government has used administrative law to redefine what Congress said it was and created it as in the Coast Guard, from a civil service, Federal Maritime Police Force, into a special branch of military that can administer civilian affairs, that can adjudicate civilian law, that can use military JAG personnel to prosecute civilians. And I'm telling you this from personal experience, because I've witnessed it myself, and I know this stuff by the back of my hand.
Yes.
Going to a federal military service academy that was paid for by the taxpayers. And I'm trying to still not just defend myself, but by doing it, defend the country.
Absolutely. And to defend the freedom of the citizens of this country. So that it doesn't happen to other people. Yeah. Thank you for fighting the good fight. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year.